Eleanor Archer paused in the hallway, staring at the small dish by the door. 3 keys rested there, glinting under the weak morning light. One belonged to Hertha master key, worn smooth by decades of use. The second was a spare, meant for guests who never stayed long. And the third should never have existed. It had been copied behind her back, slipped into her son's pocket without her permission. And every time she saw it lying there, it felt like an accusation. Her fingers hovered over the dish but didn't pick the keys up. Instead, she turned to the framed photo above the table. The frame was slightly crooked, as if someone had brushed against it. She straightened it with deliberate care. In the photo, a much younger Eleanor knelt beside a grinning 5-year-old Adam, his tiny hands gripping a toy hammer. Behind them, a half-patched wall, the first repair she'd ever done on the house after her husband died. A wall that had stood through storms, bills, birthdays, and grief. A wall that told the truth about who built this home. What Adam and Brooke didn't know was that the photo wasn't just sentimental. Behind the frame, taped to the backing, Eleanor had hidden her most important documents, once proof of payments, contracts, old receipts, the kind of papers most people threw away. She hadn't needed to look at them in years. But lately, she had been thinking about them again. The house still felt like hers. Every creak of the stairs, every crack in the paint whispered her name. Yet tonight would test that. Tonight, her son and his girlfriend had called a family meeting. Eleanor smiled faintly, a tired, sharpened smile. If they wanted a meeting about family and fairness, they were about to learn who truly held the keys. Eleanor Archer read the word twice. It used to mean late-night hot chocolate and whispered secrets with a little boy who couldn't fall asleep. Now, it sounded like a boardroom. Agenda typed into her phone by someone who didn't belong to this house. By the time the clock struck 7, Eleanor had already put on a pot of coffee. 3 mugs waited on the counter, habit more than hospitality. She sat at the far end of the table, hands folded, calm in posture, if not in pulse. Adam entered first. His smile wasn't his own. It was too practiced. Stretched across his face, like a mask borrowed from someone more confident. Behind him, Brooke swept in, heels clicking against the tile, holding her phone like a remote control for the entire room. Neither of them sat. That was Eleanor's first clue. This wasn't a conversation. This was a performance. "We've been talking," Brooke began, her voice tuned too bright, like she'd rehearsed in front of a mirror. "And we think it's time to discuss contributions." Eleanor tilted her head, as if the word were foreign. "Contributions?" she asked softly, her eyes still on her coffee. Adam jumped in, the way students used to when they were afraid their partner would forget the lines. "You've been living here rent-free, Mom, and we're happy to have you, really. But we think it's only fair you start pitching in." Brooke nodded eagerly, pressing the advantage. "Just half your pension. That's all we're asking." For a moment, Eleanor let the silence breathe. She could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the wall clock, the uneven rhythm of Adam's foot tapping nervously against the floor. Half her pension. The same pension she'd earned across 33 years of teaching. Every morning bell and every late-night grading session. Every time she skipped vacations so Adam could have new shoes instead. Half, just like that, as if it were a subscription they could cancel at will. She lifted her eyes slowly, letting the weight of her gaze fall on Brooke, who leaned against the counter like she already owned it. Adam couldn't meet her eyes at all. "Fair," Eleanor repeated, almost tasting the word. Then she set her cup down carefully, the porcelain clinking against the table in a sound that seemed to echo louder than it should. "If we're talking about fair," she said, her voice steady, deliberate, carrying the authority of someone who had once commanded classrooms full of restless teenagers, "then let's start with the deed." The air changed. Brooke blinked, thrown off script. Adam's throat worked, as he swallowed hard, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Neither spoke. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, her fingers resting lightly on the table's edge. Her voice was calm, but her smile was sharp, the kind that comes before a storm. "Because if you want half of what comes in," she said, "then we should first discuss who truly owns what you're standing in." Eleanor's hand drifted toward the mug on the counter, the one she always used when she needed steadying. It was white porcelain, simple, unremarkable except for the thin crack that ran down its side like a pale scar. She traced it absent-mindedly with her thumb, the way you would trace an old wound. That crack had a story. Adam was 5 when it happened. He'd been racing around the kitchen with a toy car, ignoring her warnings. The mug had slipped from the table, shattered into 2 pieces on the tile. Eleanor remembered Adam's wide eyes, his trembling lips, the way he'd stammered, "I didn't mean to, Mommy." She had glued it back together that night. Not because she couldn't afford another, but because she wanted him to see that mistakes could be mended, that even when things broke, love didn't have to. She still drank from it every morning, a little uneven at the rim, a little weaker than it once was, but still useful, still hers. The mug was more than ceramic. It was a mirror of this house. Every corner of these walls carried a hidden receipt. The patched drywall in the hallway, repaired after Adam swung his baseball bat too hard indoors. The creaky step on the staircase, that had survived years of midnight, sneaking when he thought she didn't hear. The chipped window in the living room that he'd cracked with a football at 12. Eleanor had paid for every repair, every fix, every bill that kept the roof overhead. There were no shared contributions, no silent benefactors. Just her. 33 years of early mornings and late nights at the school registrar's desk. 33 years of stretching paychecks, skipping vacations, sewing patches onto jackets, and counting coins at the grocery store. Every sacrifice poured into this place until the walls themselves seemed to hum with her persistence. And now they stood here at him, avoiding her eyes. Brooke with her phone clenched like evidence talking about fair contributions, as though history could be erased with a line item in a spreadsheet. Eleanor set the mug down carefully, the faint crack glinting in the kitchen light. That single flaw reminded her of every decision she had ever made, every compromise that allowed Adam to grow, every fight she fought silently while holding the family together. This house wasn't charity. It wasn't a gift she had stumbled into. It was a fortress built brick by brick, out of her sacrifices. Proof that perseverance could outlast grief, loneliness, and time itself. They saw only walls and property value. She saw a lifetime stitched into every imperfection. Her gaze hardened as she looked back at the mug, then at her son. If they thought this house was theirs for the taking, they had forgotten what it cost to keep it standing. And she was ready to remind them. The house was quiet that Tuesday night, the kind of quiet that only comes after midnight. Outside, the wind had picked up, and the branches of the oak trees scraped against the upstairs windows like fingers dragging slowly across glass. Eleanor lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Sleep had become harder lately, but not because of age. Because of them. She finally swung her legs out of bed and wrapped her robe around her shoulders. Maybe tea would help. The floor was cold under her feet as she padded softly down the hall. That's when she heard it. She stopped at the top of the staircase, one hand resting on the banister. The glow of a lamp leaked out from under Adam and Brooke's door. But as she tilted her head, the words sharpened, slicing through the hush of the house. "Once we get the deed," Brooke's voice whispered, confident, rehearsed. The same tone she used in arguments where she thought she had already won. Eleanor froze. "We'll talk to that memory care place," Brooke continued. "The one in Harborview? It's clean, and they let you tour the rooms. I already checked. Memory care. Not retirement. Not downsizing. A facility. A place for people whose minds had slipped beyond recognition." Her heart pounded in her chest. Adam mumbled something in response, his voice too low, too uncertain to catch, but Eleanor didn't need to hear the words. She had heard enough. The house seemed to close in around her. These walls had carried her through Adam's childhood, through decades of quiet work and sacrifice. And now, the son she had given everything for was conspiring with a woman who had been here barely a year, plotting to remove her from the very life she had built. Eleanor's hand tightened on the banister until her knuckles went white. She forced herself to breathe slowly, carefully, because even the sound of her breath felt dangerous in that moment. If they knew she was listening, they'd change tactics, mask their intentions, slip back into fake kindness. No, better to let them believe she was oblivious. She turned and crept back toward her room, each step measured, silent, the old wood groaning faintly under her weight. Lying back in bed, she stared at the ceiling again. But now every tick of the clock felt like a countdown. She had always thought betrayal, if it came, would arrive suddenly like a storm breaking. But this was different. A coup dressed in family smiles. By dawn, her decision was made. She would stop waiting for fairness to find her. She would start preparing, and the next call she made would not be to her son. The morning after the whisper through the door, Eleanor dressed with unusual care. Not because she wanted to impress her, but because presentation mattered. In the world she was about to step into, a neat blouse, pressed slacks, her old leather purse, armor of a kind. She brewed her coffee, sat at the table as if it were any other morning, and let Brooke hand her the day's mail with her usual fake sweetness. "Nothing important," Brooke said lightly. Adam only grunted hello from behind his phone. Neither of them asked where Eleanor was going when she picked up her keys. The attorney's office sat tucked between a coffee shop and a dry cleaner. Easy to miss if you weren't looking. 2 years ago, when she first set up the trust. Back then, she had thought of it as a formality. A kind of paperwork insurance. Something you filed away and forgot. Not anymore. Marian Cole greeted her warmly, a tall woman with sharp eyes and a calm presence. She didn't waste time with small talk. "What's changed?" she asked once Eleanor sat across from her desk. Eleanor folded her hands in her lap. Marian didn't blink. "Your son?" "Yes." Eleanor's voice was steady. "And no one in his place." "I'm not in a giving mood." Marian gave a small, approving nod and opened the file. Pages turned, pens clicked, the printer hummed softly in the background. It wasn't dramatic, it was precise. Together they rebuilt the fortress, clause by clause. The revocable trust was updated. Eleanor remained the sole trustee and sole beneficiary. No transfer on death provisions. No family signatures that could be twisted later. Investments remained hers alone, protected under her name with new restrictions. Marian glanced up. "If something happens to you, do you want to designate a beneficiary?" Eleanor thought of Adam's tired eyes, Brooke's greedy whispers, the sound of her own heart cracking at the top of the stairs the night before. Then she thought of the scholarship fund she had once supported quietly. Years ago, helping underprivileged students afford college. Kids who reminded her of the ones she used to see every day at the school. "That fund," she said. "The scholarship?" Marian typed quickly. "Done." An hour later, it was finished. No fanfare. No drawn-out debate. Just a series of signatures, a notary stamp, and a folder thick with protection. It wasn't joy, was colder than that, sharper. Like winter air filling her lungs. For the first time in months, she wasn't reacting. She was preparing. Marian slid the documents back across the desk. "Do you want them notified?" "No," Eleanor said, sliding the folder into her purse. "Not yet. Not yet." When she left the office, the world looked different. The street was the same. Cars passed, people carried lots. But Eleanor walked slower, straighter. She wasn't helpless anymore. It wasn't obvious at first, nothing dramatic. No broken glass, no doors ajar. Just a faint shift, like air that had been stirred when it shouldn't have been. She hung her purse on the hook, slipped her shoes neatly by the door, and paused. Eleanor had always been meticulous about that drawer. She closed it the same way every time, flush, smooth, aligned. Now, standing in the hallway, she noticed it was open by no more than a millimeter. But she knew. Her heart gave a slow, deliberate thud. She slid the drawer open. The papers shifted just enough to betray unfamiliar hands. Eleanor ran her fingers across the edges. Someone had touched them. She turned toward the safe in the corner. It wasn't a modern one, just a small, sturdy lockbox she'd kept for years. She knew the dial by muscle memory. She always left it in the same position, numbers lined neatly at 12 o'clock. Now it was one notch off. Her throat tightened. Not unlocked, but not hers anymore either. Someone had tested it, twisted it, maybe even tried to crack it. She checked the contents. Everything was still inside the deed. The older versions of the trust. A bundle of savings bonds, but their arrangement was wrong. She could tell. Someone had lifted them, maybe even read them, and then put them back as though she wouldn't notice. But she noticed everything. She straightened slowly, the air in her lungs sharp, metallic. That was when she saw it, the coffee shelf. She arranged it the same way every week, 3 canisters lined up by size. Labels forward, lids snug. Now one sat backward, another's lid crooked. A small detail, meaningless to anyone else, but to Eleanor it was deafening. They hadn't just wandered into her office. They had searched everywhere. Not snooping, hunting. Eleanor stood very still in the quiet kitchen, her hand resting lightly on the counter. She could almost picture it, Adam rifling through drawers, Brooke lifting canisters, both of them whispering, searching for papers, deeds, anything that proved ownership. Her ownership? For a long moment, she didn't move. She just listened to the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the wind against the windows, and the faint ringing in her ears. Then she closed the drawer, reset the safe, turned the canisters the right way around. She did it calmly, deliberately, as though erasing their fingerprints with her order. Let them think she hadn't noticed. Let them believe they were clever, because every move they made now was evident. Eleanor Archer was done playing the unsuspecting victim. It began with an email at 6:13 a.m. Eleanor was pouring her first cup of coffee when her laptop pinged. Adam's name sat in the subject line. Bold and smug. Proof of shared ownership. She clicked. A PDF opened on her screen. The title at the top in sloppy bold letters, Gift Agreement. Her eyes scanned quickly. The document claimed she had willingly transferred 50% of the property to her son and Brooke 6 months earlier. The wording was crude, the formatting off, and at the bottom her signature. Except it wasn't. It was a clumsy imitation. Like someone had copied her name off a birthday card and pasted it here. Eleanor stared at it for a full minute, not in shock, but in calculation. So this was how far they were willing to go. She opened a new email, attached the file, and typed, subject, fraudulent document attached. She sent it to Marion, her attorney. By the time she finished her coffee, a reply arrived. Do not respond. File a police report immediately. Eleanor dressed and drove to the station. The officer behind the desk didn't laugh or brush her off. He took copies, asked questions, wrote everything down. Attempted property fraud, he said, pen scratching steadily. Good thing you caught it. Good thing, Eleanor thought. She kept every receipt. But that was only the first blow. By noon, her phone buzzed again. This time it was her bank's fraud department. The woman on the line was polite, professional. Ms. Archer, we're calling to confirm a refinancing application submitted under your name, using your property address. We noticed some irregularities. Eleanor felt her pulse slow, not quicken. Tell me. It was filed online, the banker explained. Is that you? No, Eleanor said flatly. That's my son. A pause on the line. Then the banker's voice softened. We've already flagged it. You won't be held responsible, but we recommend filing a formal report. Already done, Eleanor replied, and hung up. She thought the storm had passed, but it wasn't finished. That afternoon, a certified letter arrived. The envelope bore the county clerk's seal. Power of attorney request naming Adam and Brooke as her legal guardians. Early signs of cognitive decline. Eleanor's hands shook only once as she read the signature. Dr. Leanna Whitaker. Brooke's cousin. A woman who had sat at her dinner table once, 6 months ago, silent and polite. Not an attempt to steal her house anymore. An attempt to steal her life. The next morning, Eleanor returned to the police station. I'd like to file another report, she said evenly. This one for attempted legal manipulation and falsified medical documentation. The officer read the name on the physician's note, raised his eyebrows, and whistled softly. Family. By marriage, Eleanor said. Her smile was sharp. He stamped the form. The paper trail thickened, and Eleanor's resolve hardened. They left on a Friday afternoon, Brooke calling out something about beating traffic before the storm hit. Adam followed with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, barely mumbling goodbye as the door slammed shut behind them. Eleanor waited 10 minutes. Then she stood, smoothed her blouse, and began. At 2:15, the locksmith arrived. By 2:45, every entry point front, back, side had new locks. She handed him cash and thanked him briskly. By 3 o'clock, Eleanor walked through the house with a cardboard box under one arm. She started in the guest room. Clothes in tangled heaps, empty coffee cups on the nightstand. Drawers crammed with things they hadn't bothered to fold. She didn't rage. She didn't break. She simply packed. Every sweater, every tangled charger, every cheap plastic trinket. Brooke had insisted on keeping all of it went into boxes. Was stacked neatly with his name scratched across a cooler lid. Brooke's hair tools and perfumes were tucked into another. Her name in thick black marker across the cardboard. Stacked in tidy columns, a plastic tarp stretched over the top. Weighed down with 2 bricks. It wasn't revenge. It was eviction clean, clinical, final. Eleanor sat at her desk, printer humming, ink spooling onto the page. The first envelope held a notarized 30-day eviction notice. The second, heavier, was her masterpiece, a spreadsheet printed from her old budgeting software. Every line a record of the last 14 months. Mortgage payments, property taxes, grocery runs, plumbing repairs, utility bills, every cent accounted for, every receipt traceable back to her. Adam and Brooke's names weren't listed once. She slipped both envelopes into the mailbox by the curb. The metal door clicked, shut with a finality that sent a ripple of satisfaction down her spine. Back inside, she brewed fresh coffee, the good beans she kept hidden behind the flour. The kind she never shared. The smell filled the kitchen as she carried the cup to her favorite chair by the window. She tucked her legs beneath her the way she used to when Adam was small and sick. Asleep on the couch, and she kept watch through the night. The wind picked up, leaves scratching across the porch. But inside, the house was still. No blaring podcasts, no fake laughter echoing from the guest room. No dishes left in the sink for her to clean. Just quiet. They thought they were carving out a future here. All they had done was wear out their welcome. And now, Eleanor thought, sipping her coffee black. It was time to show them the difference between living in a house and owning it. Sunday evening arrived like the tightening of a noose. Eleanor set the table with precision, each placement deliberate, almost ceremonial. But there were no plates, no silverware, no steaming dishes to soften the air. Only 2 manila folders sat in the center. Perfectly aligned, their crisp edges a silent dare. At 6:05, the front door opened. Late, Brooke entered first, perfume arriving before her, sweet and suffocating. Adam trailed behind, his eyes shadowed, the half-smile gone. Eleanor gestured toward the dining chairs. Sit. Brooke raised an eyebrow. What is this? Where's dinner? Sit, Eleanor repeated, calm but unyielding. They obeyed, Brooke with a sharp exhale, Adam with a nervous glance toward the folders. The room hummed with the tension of unspoken truths. Eleanor slid the first folder across the table. This, she said, her voice steady, is a restraining order. Already filed. It prevents you from entering this property or contacting me directly. Brooke let out a sharp laugh, brittle and defensive. Are you serious? You've completely lost it. Eleanor ignored the jab. She opened the second folder and pushed it forward. And this is a civil fraud complaint. Document forgery. Attempted identity theft. Abuse of fiduciary trust. Adam's face drained of color, his hands fidgeting in his lap. Brooke, however, sprang to her feet. After everything we've done for you, she snapped, her voice rising. This is how you treat us. Eleanor lifted her eyes, calm and cutting. Everything you've done to me. Not for me. Brooke's lips curled. You're just a bitter, lonely old woman. Clinging to a house you can't even manage. You need us. Eleanor's smile was small and sharp. Do I? Her hand reached beneath the table runner, pressing a small recorder's button. The room filled with Brooke's own voice, clear and unmistakable. Once we get the deed, we'll tour Harborview Memory Care. It's clean. And they let you tour the rooms. The recording ended, leaving silence so heavy it pressed against their chests. Adam closed his eyes. Brooke's face paled. For the first time, neither had a script. I suggest you leave now, Eleanor said, her tone even, almost gentle. And if you want to continue this conversation, we'll do it in court. Brooke's chair scraped loudly against the floor as she grabbed her purse. You'll regret this, she hissed, her eyes darting like a cornered animal. Adam followed her silently, his head bowed, his footsteps heavy. The front door shut behind them. A beat later, the gate clicked. The sound was final. Eleanor sat very still at the table, staring at the two folders. For months, they had treated her silence as weakness, her patience as frailty. Tonight, she had shown them what it really was, preparation. She gathered the folders, walked to her office, and placed them inside the safe. This time, she turned the dial until it clicked, locked tight. Then she returned to the kitchen, brewed herself a fresh cup of coffee, and carried it to her chair by the window. The night pressed close outside, the wind bending the trees. But the house was steady, still. For the first time in a long time, Eleanor didn't feel like she was holding her breath. She exhaled, and the silence answered back. The house was different after they left. It wasn't the walls or the paint or the furniture. It was the air. The tension that had clung to every corner, every creak of the floorboards, every slammed door. It was gone. For the first time in over a year, the silence felt natural. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't waiting to be broken. It simply was. Eleanor woke early the next morning, sunlight spilling across her bedroom floor. She moved through the house like she was rediscovering it. Each room breathing again. The guest room came first. The curtains Brooke had chosen, cheap florals and colors that screamed for attention, were ripped down and stuffed straight into a donation bag. Eleanor didn't hesitate. She picked a soft fabric instead, a pale gray that reminded her of morning fog. The walls, once plastered with Brooke's so-called modern touch, were repainted over the weekend. Stroke by stroke, Eleanor covered every trace of their presence. Not trendy, not flashy, just colors she liked. Colors that felt quiet, steady, hers. She opened the garden doors one afternoon and stared at the yard. The flower beds were dry, the shrubs half wild. For months, she had nearly let it all die. She knelt down in the soil, her hands working slowly, pulling weeds, planting bulbs she had kept in storage. It wasn't about beauty, yet it was about reclaiming ground that had been trampled. The house was safer now, too. The deed rested inside a fireproof box. The trust documents sealed and updated. Her pension deposits rerouted to a new bank account under a fresh name. Every lock had been changed twice. Every password reset. Every loophole closed. Each night before bed, Eleanor checked the locks. Not because she was afraid anymore, but because it gave her pride. This was her fortress, her proof of survival, her legacy in brick and mortar. Neighbors began to notice her again. The mailman called her by name. Instead of waving blankly, Mrs. Peterson. Next door dropped off extra zucchini from her garden. Eleanor found herself baking again small batches of bread and cookies. Just for the smell, just because she could. She no longer shared her coffee. She brewed it strong, black, hotter than she used to, poured into her chipped mug with the pale scar. She sat on the back porch most mornings, steam curling in the cool air, and watched as the garden slowly revived. Sometimes her phone buzzed with notifications, Brooks cryptic, online posts about betrayal and ageism. Adam's half-hearted attempts to call. Eleanor never answered. Some bridges were worth repairing. Some never were. The house stayed quiet. No fake laughter echoing from the guest room. No blaring podcasts spilling through the walls. No midnight footsteps sneaking to the fridge. Just wood and air. Just roots and earth. Just silence. But this silence didn't ache anymore. It sang. Eleanor lifted her mug, the chipped rim pressing against her lips. She drank deeply, and the taste was sharper than any victory speech. The house was hers. The life was hers. And for the first time in years, peace was hers too.